Today's topic is Thou Art That, and it's the last in the series of the Svetasvatara Upanishad. Before we begin, I'd like to wish everyone a happy Father's Day. And I know that many of you are traveling now and that you are with your family, and I wish you all the best. Thou art that. Just a quick review before we launch into today's final episode. Most of the themes in the last talk are from the chapter 3 of the Svetasvatara Upanishad. In verse 17 and 18, Svetasvatara tells us himself, meaning the supreme reality, devoid of senses, he shines through the functions of the senses. He is the friend and refuge of all. He resides in the body, the city of 9 gates. He sports in the world without innumerable forms. He is the master, the ruler of the whole world, animate and inanimate. Okay, let's deconstruct this verse. Himself devoid of senses. He shines through the functions of the senses. Well, we falsely think that our mind is conscious. But Vedanta tells us, no, consciousness is separate from the mind, and we're talking about pure consciousness. Consciousness illumines the mind, but it does not belong to it. This is the Atman we're speaking of. That consciousness is the indwelling Atman, the I am, the center of consciousness in all. As the Kena Upanishad so poignantly expresses, at whose behest does the mind think? Each of these questions is something to meditate on. Who bids the body live? Who makes the tongue speak? Who is that effulgent being that directs the eye to form and color and the ear to sound? The Upanishad goes on. The self is the ear of the ear, the mind of the mind, the speech of the speech. He is also breath of the breath and eye of the eye. It is that consciousness that resides behind the senses and illumines their function. Svetasvatara tells us he resides in the body, the city of 9 gates. The self is both within and without the body. Nothing can limit it. In verse 19, we read, he moves fast, though without feet. He grasps everything, though without hands. He sees all, though without eyes. He hears everything, though without ears. He knows all, but none knows him. He is called the Supreme, the Great One. He knows all, but none knows him. Of him there is no knower. The self is impossible to describe. Sri Ramakrishna tried unsuccessfully on various occasions to share his experiences of samadhi. One day, he described to his monastic disciples experiences up to the heart and the throat. And then pointing to the spot between the eyebrows, he said, the Supreme Self is directly known, and the individual experiences samadhi when the mind comes up here. There remains then a thin, transparent screen separating the Supreme Self and the individual self. The sadhaka then experiences, saying this, he entered into samadhi. When the samadhi ended, he tried again to describe the Supreme Self and again went into samadhi. Finally, after repeated attempts, he tearfully said to his disciples, alas, in spite of all my efforts, the Divine Mother did not allow me to speak. She pressed my mouth. Swami Sardananda described, he explained, we then understood that mind, intellect, and the like, with the help of which speaking becomes possible, have not a very long range. And again, we understood that the complete realization of the Supreme Self could not be attained if one did not go beyond that range. The master was trying to make the impossible possible because of his love for us. As the Kena Upanishad in chapter 2, verse 3 says, he truly knows Brahman who knows him as beyond knowledge. He who thinks that he knows not. In other words, Brahman can never be the object of knowledge. What then happens in samadhi? An aspirant merges in Brahman. Not only was Sri Ramakrishna incapable of describing Brahman, that which is beyond words, he himself divulged to Swami Ramakrishnananda, said, never say that God is this or that. No one has yet been able to know God as he really is, and no one ever will. He is the ocean of consciousness. Sri Ramakrishna went on. Sages such as Shuka, Sanaka, and Narada drank a drop of that ocean and became God intoxicated. I have experienced God as with form and without form, and again beyond both. But what he really is, I do not know. This is an avatar speaking, and it humbles us to hear this. So throughout this Upanishad, Svetasvatara has emphasized the liberating role of knowledge. Does this imply the importance of self-effort? But Svetasvatara explains grace is the cause of liberation. We can never attain that realization with our finite efforts. That which is beyond the law of karma comes only through grace. But when then is the role of self-effort? Sadhana for the jnani is the path of discrimination, an unremitting practice of discrimination that purifies the mind and the sense organs. The phenomenology of sense experience, honed by a discriminating mind, culminates in a luminosity of perception, bereft of illusion. Sri Ramakrishna explains, God is known by a pure buddhi, that is the higher mind. How so? Sri Ramakrishna says, pure mind, pure buddhi, and pure atman are one and the same thing. Continues, in the samadhi that comes at the end of reasoning and discrimination, no such thing as I, meaning the ego, exists. Vivekananda explains, the wind of grace of the Lord is blowing on forever and ever. Do you spread your sail? Whenever you do anything, do it with your whole heart, concentrated on it. Think day and night, I am the essence of that supreme existence, knowledge, bliss. What fear and anxiety have I? This body, mind, and intellect are all transient, and that which is beyond these is myself. The disciple then asked, thoughts like these come only for a while now and then, but quickly vanish, and I think all sorts of trash and nonsense. Vivekananda then answered, it happens like that in the initial stage, but gradually it is overcome. But from the beginning, intensity of desire in the mind is needed. Think always, I am ever pure, ever knowing, and ever free. How can I do anything evil? Can I ever be fooled like ordinary man with insignificant charms of lust and wealth? Strengthen the mind with such thoughts. This will surely bring real good. So we've seen throughout our study of the first 3 chapters, the importance of consciousness itself. It's something we all experience. And because of that, our teachers tell us, we all have a tangible experience of God in a way. With the help of that consciousness within, we become conscious of everything around us. The eyes see, the mind thinks, the ears hear, but sages remind us to inquire, what is the eye of the eye? What is the ear of the ear? What is the mind of the mind, our center of consciousness? Our teachers will tell us, don't live on the surface, dive deep, as though you are diving into the ocean. Dive deep into your heart and come into his presence, the source of all. When you feel he is really within, then your mind will also become concentrated, and you will become convinced that he is everywhere. So now Svetasvatara begins the 4th chapter with 2 ideas prevalent in the Upanishads. In verse 1, he says, O Brahman supreme, formless art thou, and yet though the reason none knows, thou bringest forth many forms. Thou bringest them forth and then withdrawest them to thyself. Fill us with thoughts of thee. Okay, so first, he is formless. He is beyond all form. But again, Svetasvatara is telling us, every form is God's form. In verses 2 through 4, Svetasvatara takes us to a high level of consciousness with his poetry. Thou art the fire, thou art the sun, thou art the air, thou art the moon, thou art the starry firmament, thou art Brahman supreme, thou art the waters, thou, the creator of all. Thou art woman, thou art man, thou art the youth, thou art the maiden, thou art the old man tottering with his staff, thou facest everywhere. Thou art the dark butterfly, thou art the green parrot with red eyes, thou art the thundercloud, the seasons, the seas. Without beginning art thou, beyond time, beyond space. Now in these verses, Svetasvatara is telling us, God is everything, beyond time and beyond space. In 2 sentences, Vivekananda explains this truth. The world is not, God is. But then after his sadhana had matured, he reached an even higher spiritual insight. God is all. So what do these 2 apparently contradictory statements mean? How can these 2 statements be true at the same time? They are 2 stages of spiritual practice and realization. In the path of knowledge, aspirants are first taught to practice neti neti atma. The self is neither this nor that. And this is important because we cannot jump to the rooftop, we'll get hurt and we'll have a fall. If we haven't strengthened the mind and purified the mind with discrimination, then we can have a spiritual fall. So to strengthen their conviction in the ephemeral nature of this world, the practice of neti neti, atma, is first taught. Then once convinced, they're then qualified to ascend the ladder of self-realization to assimilate an even higher truth. Iti, iti, it is this, it is this. All is Brahman. So it's important to note, this is not pantheism, because the universe and God are not identical, as in pantheism. Brahman remains the same, but it is the high attainment of Advaita Vedanta. To explain these 2 stages of experience, Sri Ramakrishna gave the example. At night, in other words, in our ignorance, we mistake a rope, meaning Brahman, for a snake at rest, Maya. It's a mirage. But the knower of Brahman knows beyond doubt that Maya is this phantom universe, or snake, and Brahman is the underlying reality, the rope. Without Brahman, there is no Maya. In other words, without the rope, there can be no phantom snake. And at that stage of jnana, when we see Maya, the phantom universe, and Brahman as the underlying reality, we then realize all is not, God is. The snake is unreal, and the rope alone is real. It's an actual experience. Then as we ascend to a higher stage, we realize God is all. What happens in this state? Maya is seen as the divine Shakti, the power of Brahman. Sri Ramakrishna said, it is only after attaining Brahmajnana that one sees non-duality, the oneness of Brahman and its Shakti. Brahman and Shakti are identical, like fire and its power to burn. That is the image we're given to meditate on that metaphysical principle. He went on, when a man thinks of fire, he must also think of its power to burn. Again, when he thinks of the power to burn, he must also think of the fire. The two are inseparable. So in these verses, Svetasvatara is lifting us up to this view of what we call the big jnani, not the jnani that sees reality of Brahman within the form, and thereby tries to negate the form by stating all is not, God is. But the big jnani who sees all forms as Brahman. No form needs to be negated. All is God. To use the analogy of the snake and the robe, when the big jnani sees the world, Shakti is there in charge. The snake is wriggling. Form itself is a pulsation of consciousness. In verse 5, Svetasvatara tells us, Maya is thy divine consort, wedded to thee. Thou art her master, her ruler. Red, white, and black is she, each color, a guna. Many are her children, the rivers, the mountains, flowers, stone and tree, beast, bird, and man, in every way like herself. Thou spirit in flesh, forgetting what thou art, unitest with Maya, but only for a season. Parting from her at last, thou regainest thyself. So here, Svetasvatara is describing the nature of Prakriti Maya. Red, white, and black refers to the gunas, rajas, activity, sattva, tranquility, and tamas, inertia. Every object of nature, including fire, sun, moon, lightning, has no relative existence apart from the three gunas. Maya is thy divine consort, wedded to thee. Thou art her master, her ruler. Svetasvatara tells us. In what sense is Brahman the ruler, we might ask? According to Vedanta, Brahman can exist without Maya, but Maya cannot exist without Brahman. So let's penetrate this relationship of Brahman and Maya. Swami Pravrajika gives a lucid explanation in his introduction to Shankara's crest jewel of discrimination, the Viveka Chudamani. He writes, the most difficult of all philosophical problems is the relation between the finite and the infinite. The problem of how the finite world came into being. A God who transforms himself into the visible universe is himself subject to transformation and change. He cannot be regarded as the absolute reality. A God who creates a world limits himself by the very act of creation. and thus ceases to be infinite. The question, why should God create at all, remains unanswered. He goes on. This difficulty is overcome, however, if we consider the world as Maya. And this explanation of our universe is moreover in perfect accord with the findings of modern science, which may be summarized as follows. A soap bubble with irregularities and corrugations on its surface is perhaps the best representation of the universe revealed to us by the theory of relativity. The universe is not the interior of the soap bubble, but its surface. And the substance out of which this bubble is blown, the soap film, is empty space welded into empty time. And here the Swami was quoting Sir James Jeans. Thus, it is only when we analyze the nature of the universe and discover it to be Maya, neither absolutely real nor absolutely non-existent, that we learn how the phenomenal surface of the soap bubble safeguards the eternal presence of the absolute. Let's go deeper. The Upanishads, it is true, appear to consider Brahman as the first cause of the universe, both material and efficient. They declare that the universe emanates from, subsists in, and finally merges into the absolute Brahman. Shankara never directly contradicts the Upanishads, but he explains such statements in a different way. The universe, he says, is a superimposition upon Brahman. Brahman remains eternally infinite and unchanged. It is not transformed into this universe. It simply appears as this universe to us in our ignorance. We superimpose the apparent world upon Brahman, just as we sometimes superimpose a snake upon a coil of rope. This theory of superimposition, Vivartavada, is inseparably linked with the theory of causality. Causal relation exists in the world of multiplicity, which is Maya. Within Maya, the mind cannot function without causal relation. But to speak of cause and effect with reference to the absolute is simply absurd. To seek to know what caused the world is to transcend the world. To seek to find the cause of Maya is to go beyond Maya. And when we do that, Maya vanishes, for the effect ceases to exist. How then can there be a cause to a non-existent effect? In other words, the relation between Brahman and Maya is by its very nature unknowable and undefinable by any process of the human intellect. Thou, spirit and flesh, forgetting what thou art, unite us with Maya, but only for a season. Parting from her at last, thou regainest thyself. Here Svetasvatara is referring to those aspirants who seek liberation. Sense enjoyment no longer ties them to the cycle of birth and rebirth. They transcend Maya. We are bound, but not for eternity, only for a season. The question then comes, how do we end that season? How do we transcend the gunas and go beyond Maya? Sri Krishna explains in the Gita, the 18th chapter, by utilizing all the 4 yogas. For example, through Jnana Yoga, we read in verse 20, the 18th chapter, Krishna says, there is that knowledge from Sattva proceeding, which knows one being deathless in every creature, entire amidst all division. Through Karma Yoga, verse 26, Sri Krishna says, the doer without desire, who does not boast of his deed, who is ardent enduring untouched by triumph, in failure untroubled. He was a man of sattva. Through Raja Yoga, verse 54. And he who dwells united with Brahman, Krishna says, calm in mind, not grieving, not craving, regarding all men with equal acceptance, he loves me most dearly. Through Bhakti Yoga, we come to verses 55 and 56, 18th chapter. Sri Krishna says, to love is to know me, my innermost nature, the truth that I am. Through this knowledge, he enters at once to my being. All that he does is offered before me in utter surrender. My grace is upon him. He finds the eternal, the place unchanging. Now we come to the Upanishad, verses 6 and 7. We find the embodied being and the pure self are then described. Svetasvatara tells us, like two beautiful birds of golden plumage, companions inseparable, perched high up on the self-same tree. As man, thou tastest the sweet fruits of the tree, the sweet and bitter fruits. But as Brahman, master of Maya, thou remainest unseen, immobile, calmly observing. So these two verses are also found in the Mundaka Upanishad. And from them, we get a vivid image of our human condition. Brahman resides in this temple, our body. But I, forgetful of my oneness with Brahman, am distracted and blinded by my desire for sense objects and its subsequent yo-yo effect on me of enjoyments and sufferings each day, all while the witnessing self, so near, looks on from within, calm and bliss-filled. When the three gunas overtake us, we get mixed up and mistake the shadow existence for the reality. We mistake darkness for light. As explained in verse 8, Svetasvatara tells us, forgetting his oneness with thee, bewildered by his weakness, full of sorrow is man, but let him look close on thee. Know thee as himself, O Lord most worshipful, and behold thy glory. Lo, all his heavy sorrow is turned to joy. For once we embark on the spiritual path, our sadhana works to awaken us, and we begin to receive glimpses of this divine irony. An irony so aptly expressed and described by Swami Brahmananda. He said, there are times when it becomes impossible for me to teach anyone. No matter where I look, I see only God wearing many masks. Who am I, the teacher? Who is to be taught? How can God teach God? But when my mind comes down again to a lower level, I see the ignorance in man and I try to remove it. So as we begin to remove the masks, the sheaths of ignorance of our psychophysical being, we approach nearer and nearer to the indwelling witness, our true nature. And our shadow self that was playing before becomes less and less real, until finally the sheaths drop away altogether and we merge into Brahman. Swami Vivekananda discussed these passages many times in his talks. He said the lower bird was always hopping from twig to twig, now eating sweet fruits and being happy, now eating bitter fruits and being miserable. One day, when he had eaten a fruit more bitter than usual, he glanced up at the calm, majestic upper bird and thought, how I would like to be like him. And he hopped up a little towards him. Many times was this repeated until at last he drew very near the upper bird. The brilliancy of his plumage dazzled him, seemed to absorb him. And finally, to his wonder and surprise, he found there was only one bird. He was the upper bird all the time. Swami Vivekananda describes the birds in detail. So in this body are the two birds always going together. Both have the same form and beautiful wings. One is the human soul eating the fruits. The other is God himself, of the same nature. He is also in this body, the soul of our soul. He eats neither good nor evil fruits, but stands and looks on. But the lower bird knows that he is weak and small and humble and tells all sorts of lies. He says he is a woman or he is a man. So this is a sobering truth. We're only a parent, living only a phantom life, so long as we are identified with this psychophysical existence, this body and mind, our job, our ambitions, our possessions. Vivekananda tells us, when we have come near enough, we see that we are no other than God, and we exclaim, he whom I have described to you as the life of this universe, as present in the atom and in suns and moons, he is the basis of our own life, the soul of our soul. Nay, thou art that. That is what this Jnana Yoga teaches. So eventually, when we near the higher bird, we realize I never was a lower bird. Only the higher bird dreaming the life of the lower bird. Only the higher bird dreaming the life of the lower bird. So this Vedanta metaphor answers the core question, who am I? I and you are essentially divine. Once Ramana Maharshi was asked, am I qualified to learn Vedanta? And Ramana Maharshi answered, if you use the word I, you are qualified. Why? Because I amness, is the pointer to the self, the witness, the unseen seer, not a created truth, an existing truth. Meanwhile, we are the lower bird, identified with the three sheaths. The law of karma acts, but who is sowing? Who is reaping? The individual soul, so long as it possesses the illusion of ego. I'm responsible for my karma. But the Atman remains unaffected, uncontaminated. What is that state? Swami Subodhananda, monastic disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, had many visions. Yet one day he said, I don't trust visions. Those who were present were amazed. Then he said, now I have reached the state where I know that the Atman is completely separate from the body. So just as with a dry coconut, the meat of the coconut is completely separate from the shell. Sri Ramakrishna explained the state of Brahmajnana. Such a one attains self-knowledge when his worldly attachment totally disappears. Then he realizes that the body and soul are two separate things. It is very difficult to separate with a knife the kernel of a coconut from the shell before the milk inside has dried up. when the milk dries up, the kernel rattles inside the shell. At that time, it loosens itself from the shell. Then the fruit is called a dry coconut. Once a Christian devotee asked Swami Prabhupada, did Christ suffer on the cross? And Swami answered, no, it was the ripe coconut. The individual self and the immortal self are perched on the branches of the self-same tree. The tree is the body. The Atman and individual self both dwell within this body, as it were. The Atman is the God within us. Vivekananda concludes, the lower bird was but the reflection of the one above. So we are in reality one with the Lord, but the reflection makes us seem many, as when the one sun reflects in a million dewdrops and seems a million tiny suns. The reflection must vanish if we are to identify ourselves with our real nature, which is divine. Now we come to verses 9 and 10. Svetasvatara tells us, changeless thou art, supreme, pure. In thee dwell the gods, the source of all scriptures thou art. Yet what shall scriptures avail if they be smooth on the lip, but absent from the heart? To him who knows thee comes fullness, to him alone. Thou art Lord and Master of Maya. Man is her slave. With Maya uniting, thou hast brought forth the universe. The source of all scriptures art thou, and the source of all creeds. The universe is thy Maya, and thou, great God, her Lord. Wherever the eye fall, there within every form thou dwellest. So here, Svetasvatara is struck with wonder, seeing this world as a manifestation of Brahman. He reminds us that our ordinary experience emanates from Brahman. Various aspects of God, the Vedas, ritual practices, all emanate from Brahman, the syllable Om. One commentator, Devadatta Kali, comments, the seer declares with relish that whatever has been in the past and will be in the future, and everything of which the Vedas speak, nothing short of the entire cosmos, reverberates with divine consciousness. Wherever the eye falls, there within every form thou dwellest, Svetasvatara tells us. The whole universe is the body of Brahman. But why can't we see that? Vedanta calls it adhyasa, superimposition again. For example, we are walking down a path at night, and suddenly we see a snake by the road and cry out. A watchman comes running and shines his light, and we discover it was only a rope. So also we are under the spell of Maya's darkness, which creates a solution of a world of solid matter. But in fact, it is only an appearance. Those who attain the light of knowledge, the knowledge of Brahman, then return to normal consciousness. And what do they see? This world as a dream. For example, a jnani sees all people as so many glass houses with a light within. But the glass house, the body-mind complex, is dreamlike, illusory, and it is something to be negated. But there is yet another richer state of attainment, that of the vijnani, who sees no distinct forms, but everything as Brahman. He sees the reality of Brahman as all forms, not in all forms. The vijnani sees people as glass houses, yes, but even the glass house is an appearance of light, because form itself is a pulsation of consciousness. Swami Nikhilananda explained the state of enlightenment in his Svetasvatara Upanishad commentary by referring to the snake and the rope analogy of Maya and Brahman. He wrote, as the rope alone pervades the illusory snake, so Brahman pervades this universe. On account of Maya, the ignorant see in the universe good and evil, pain and pleasure, life and death, and other pairs of opposites. To the knower of truth, all this is Brahman, ever pure, ever conscious, and ever free. At a great distance from the sun, one sees night and day, Nikhilananda went on. Light and darkness, the phenomena that would not exist if one could view things from the sun itself. To the knower of Brahman, Maya itself is Brahman. Sri Ramakrishna said, to the Vijnani, Brahman alone has become everything. Therefore, to the Vijnani, this world is a mansion of mirth. But to the Jnani, it is a framework of illusion. What then is the Vijnana experience? What did Svetasvatara actually see in his superconscious vision? The answer lies in a poignant incident that occurred in the life of Sri Ramakrishna and his telling effect upon his Vedanta guru, Totapuri. Totapuri, after 40 years of sadhana in his monastery, attained nirvikalpa samadhi, after which he roamed freely, unconfined to one place for more than 3 days. But when he arrived in Dakshineshwar, he was attracted to Sri Ramakrishna, bestowed upon him the Vedanta sannyas, after which Sri Ramakrishna entered into nirvikalpa samadhi for 3 days until Totapuri brought his mind back to normal consciousness. And thereafter, Totapuri stayed at Dakshineshwar for 11 months. Totapuri had a strong, robust body, and he was gifted with sadhu qualities: self-effort, self-reliance, self-confidence. He didn't accept bhakti yoga, path of devotion, or Vijnana experience of iti. All this is Brahman. Seeing this creation as real as in the superconscious sense, he ridiculed Sri Ramakrishna's chanting the names of God, while clapping his hands. He would say, "Are you clapping your hands to make chapatis?" This is how he scoffed. It's Bhakti Yoga tradition. Then, before his sacred Duni fire, he talked of Brahman and all objects and beings as manifestation. But when a servant began to take a lighted charcoal from the sacred Duni fire for his pipe, Totapuri became enraged. Sri Ramakrishna laughed in ecstasy. "For shame," he said. "I see the depth of your knowledge of Brahman," meaning it was not the highest level of nirvikalpa. Totapuri became serious and vowed never to become angry again. Sometime after, he was stricken with blood dysentery. His mind couldn't become absorbed in meditation because of excruciating pain. Disgusted, he thought, "I am not the body. Why associate any longer with it?" And determined to give up his body, with his mind fixed on Brahman, he waded out into the Ganges. But Totapuri crossed almost over to the other side, and there was no depth of water in the Ganges to drown him. Totapuri was incredulous. What is this divine Maya? What a mysterious play of the Lord. And immediately, as if someone within him lifted a veil covering his mind, he had a dazzling sense of enlightenment. The omnipresent divine mother, cosmic mother, omnipotent mother, he exclaimed, Mother is in the water and land. Mother is in the body and the mind. Mother is illness and health. Mother is knowledge and ignorance. Mother is life and death. Whatever I see, hear, think, and imagine is mother. She turns yes into no, and no into yes. No embodied being can go beyond her jurisdiction unless she is pleased to release him, and no one has even the power to die. Again, the same is beyond the body, mind, and intellect, transcendent and devoid of attributes. The next morning, when Sri Ramakrishna came and found him, he saw bliss radiated from Totapuri's face, and his body was free from disease. Totapuri said to him, "Ah, how ignorant I have been all these years." Smiling, Sri Ramakrishna said, "You argued with me saying Shakti is not real. Now you have seen for yourself that she exists. She taught me long ago that Brahman and Shakti are identical, like fire and its power to burn. Brahman and the power of Brahman are identical." Swami Bhaumananda, a wonderful holy man whom I met in Pune, explained Totapuri's Nirvikalpa experience was only partial. He believed in God transcendent, not transcendent and immanent. He did not accept the Leela, the divine play. That is why Sri Ramakrishna became his guru in this respect. So in conclusion, the Svetasvatara Upanishad, with the other 10 major Upanishads, this bestows a grand philosophy based on the realizations of the avatars and the great saints and seers. And the highest commentaries of these Upanishads come to us by reading and meditating on the lives of these great souls, a meditation on living scriptures.